want to show you the picture. I'm bringing Matt Gaetz, Congressman Gaetz right now. But Mike Johnson, let's see this again. First thing he did was not go to the sticks, but to call the media into the conference room where they had this intense debate for hours when he was named designee. He bowed his head in prayer with the entire conference in back of him. Bowed his head in prayer to Almighty God. Matt Gaetz, it was epic, historic, unprecedented. Walk us through it.
Oh, thanks so much, Stephen. I have to start by thanking the War Room Posse. This would not have happened without you. I can legitimately say that the feedback people were getting from our activists all over the country led them to the best result. And I also want to thank you, Steve, because though I get very frustrated with you sometimes when I'm trying to call you and get advice and you're broadcasting, 87 hours a day, I do appreciate in the off hours your counsel. And it's important for people to know how gracious you are with that and how much I appreciate it and how much my colleagues appreciate it. So I want to give you the first draft. Let me
just say one thing, and I always defer to Gaetz because this is a young man that's got he's playing 5-dimension chess all the time, and sometimes we have crosswords, a little hot talking, but it's all in the process of making sure things run well. Matt, terrific job. Walk us through what happened.
No, it's the Irish in you and the Scotch Irish in me, maybe. So, all right, here's what happened. The chapter of this that was dispositive, the crescendo, begins as Tom Emmer is withdrawing from the race yesterday. I told Emmer on Sunday he was not going to get there. He was going to move like a hot knife through butter through about the first 80% of the conference, but that there was going to be a series of votes that were never going to be there for him. He wanted to run through it, and I said, Tom, here's the deal. You can have your runway, but when you get to that last group that will not support you, you cannot drag this on for days. You cannot drag this on for weeks. You cannot play into what Kevin McCarthy was working the whole time to try to get people to believe that the only person that could govern the Republican conference is Kevin McCarthy. So Emmer agrees that he's going to have his shot, but that it's going to be quick. So we get that through the gestation system early yesterday. So as Emmer is withdrawing, Mark Molinaro, a moderate New York freshman Republican, stands up at the microphone and says, well, instead of restarting this process and having a candidate forum and sending everybody home for a good cry, let's just take a non-binding poll on where people would be on the person who came in second to Tom Emmer, and that was Mike Johnson. And Elise Stefanik said, well, that's against the rules. The rules don't contemplate it. We can't do that. And brilliantly, Mark Molinaro says, then I move for unanimous consent that the rules be waived and we take a poll on whether or not Mike Johnson could be our speaker nominee. And guess who objects to that unanimous consent request? Kevin McCarthy.
Who was that?
Kevin McCarthy stands up and erupts and says, I object to doing a roll call on Mike Johnson. And Mike Johnson was exasperated. All the times Johnson had voted for McCarthy, had carried his water, maybe even voted for some bills he didn't like because he was working toward the Republican conference's stated objectives under McCarthy. And here was the thing. It showed everyone that it was actually McCarthy who was working to knife Scalise. It was actually McCarthy who was working to knife Jim Jordan. It was McCarthy working to knife everyone, and he hadn't yet figured out a way to knife Mike Johnson. And so he was worried that there was going to be this great unifying moment, and he scuttled the unifying moment. So because of McCarthy's objection, we had to have this 3-hour delay. And, candidates announce again, have another forum. And guess what happens during that delay, Steve? Patrick McHenry runs to the House floor, opens it up out of recess, and then adjourns till noon today. Now, why did he do that? Because they were setting up a play to block Mike Johnson with write-in votes in the intra-conference process for Kevin McCarthy. They were promising people hearings on their favorite legislation, passage of bills. I heard people promised, maybe you'll get a chairmanship. And the play was for McCarthy to return as speaker and then Jim Jordan to be the deputy speaker in some sort of like Dwight Schrute assistant to the regional manager posture. And that would have been debasing to Jordan, someone I like a great deal, and it would have been empowering to McCarthy. So Garrett Graves and all these people are working to try to effectuate this return of McCarthy. And they're telling us there are going to be 100 votes for McCarthy on the write-in. You know how many there were? 33. on the first write-in. So they flame out terribly. Mike Johnson's gaining momentum. Ultimately, McCarthy gets 43 to vote for him on a secret ballot, but Mike Johnson gets a majority, and then he says, you know what I want? I want a roll call vote, so that those 43 would have to announce themselves as being for a candidate who wasn't even running instead of a unifying force like Mike Johnson. And when we called for the roll call, do you know how many people voted for Kevin McCarthy? 0. He went from zero. So he went from promising 100 votes to delivering 43 to 0 willing to vote for him. And everyone in the room knew at that moment that I wasn't the force for chaos. I wasn't causing disunity. That for the last 3 weeks, the reason the House of Representatives has been paralyzed is because for his own selfish gain, Kevin McCarthy was sabotaging the candidacy of anyone else because he was plotting a return. And we stopped it. And in the place of Kevin McCarthy, we get a Bayou Louisiana Mike Johnson, a brilliant constitutional attorney. He has been my seatmate in the House Judiciary Committee for 7 years. For 7 years, we have worked against the illegitimate impeachments, against the weaponization of this government. This guy did the toughest cases before the Louisiana Supreme Court. He is sharp. He will be as respected in the halls of in the homes of our most meaningful, righteous, and patriotic donors as he will at the rallies with our most enthusiastic and meaningful activists. It is going to be a great moment for the House. And you know what? At the very end, when some people didn't know if they could still even bring back McCarthy, a few of them just left the room and didn't vote. And the swamp is on the run. MAGA is ascendant. And if you don't think that moving from Kevin McCarthy to MAGA Mike Johnson shows the ascendance of this movement and where the power in the Republican Party truly lies, then you're not paying attention. But they are crying, they are hand-wringing and bedwetting over on K Street because we have an honorable, righteous man who is about to take this position. He's going to do great things for the country.
I want to make sure we go back to this because of the 20. Once you made the vote, once Mike Johnson said, I want it on the record. We're not going to go to the floor because McCarthy's guys blocked it, but I want it on the record here. Not one of the 43 stood up and said, I'm voting for McCarthy, correct?
No, and obviously because McCarthy and Graves and these guys were running this because they were out promising the world to people, they voted for McCarthy. But then Kevin McCarthy, after voting on the secret anonymous ballot for himself, then had to stand up and vote for Mike Johnson after his objections had been overrun, after his coalition had dissolved, and after the sad hopes of a desperate man trying to cling to power were vanquished.
I want to go back to the specter. We've called it the specter of McCarthy has loomed over this entire thing, and the mainstream media refused. They kept saying we were the causes of chaos. This is because the lobbyists, the corporatists, the oligarchs on Wall Street, big tech, have control of him in this apparatus. They've had it now for over a decade, right? And they don't want to give it up. That was, at the end of the day, that's what the fight was about.
Right. When they are in control, the American people get chaos. We get chaos with no budgets, with rising debts, with an administrative bureaucratic state that has seemingly no check, with all of these performative resolutions and investigations that don't result in meaningful change for our people. That's chaos. I have tried to bring order out of that chaos. And the reason it took me a little longer than expected, the reason it took 3 weeks instead of 3 days, is because Kevin McCarthy leveraged the last vestiges of his power to try to block any other human of any other ideology from being able to assume the speakership. And he was defeated. The swamp was defeated. And it would not have happened without this posse. It would not have happened without some great work from people like Jody Arrington, Clay Higgins, Scott Perry. We had a great team working to give Mike Johnson the support he needed to build a coalition. Kevin Hearn was an absolute star. Mark Green was the star. There is going to be a real opportunity for us to come together. It is on our terms.
This is why
it is their surrender on our terms.
Right. This is what Green said when Green dropped out and said, he tweeted out, he says, there are games being played. Those are the games we're talking about. But also, Emmer and Scalise had a role in this also. This was really a unifying moment for the entire conference. Didn't they have a role in this also?
Yeah, and I respect these men, and I know they might not be the favorite of your audience, but there was a moment when I went to Emmer and Scalise and I said, look, fellas, like now you see it. You see it plain as day that the person who was working against you all along was Kevin McCarthy. And Steve Scalise, like the Italian godfather, sat in the corner as McCarthy was trying to block his fellow Louisianan Mike Johnson, and member after member came up to Steve Scalise, and he would give them advice and counsel people respect Steve so much and listen to him. And you watched Steve Scalise put the final dagger in the heart of the hopes of Kevin McCarthy's return, and it was a beautiful chef's kiss because Steve Scalise actually was not treated fairly during this process. Kevin did everything he could to hurt Steve, and the fact that Steve now gets to put Mike Johnson in that chair over Kevin McCarthy's attempted comeback is glorious.
Another Louisianan. Real quickly, I know you got to bounce, but you, in your 7 years as the wingman with Johnson, he's very focused on the administrative state. He's very focused on the deep state. He's as a constitutionalist, he's beyond upset about what's happened to DOJ. Walk me through what do you think that's going to take as far as the speakership?
Well, Mike Johnson lashes a technical proficiency to go after the administrative state with a real desire and willingness to do so. We have had some people demonstrate great proficiency, but maybe not as much willingness. And then some people aren't willing at all. Mike Johnson sees the weaponized administrative state for what it is. The best questioning that I've seen from any member on any subject in the 118th Congress was last year when Mike Johnson pinned Merrick Garland down on critical race theory and the fact that his own son-in-law was profiting off of it and Garland was then serving as the muscle. It was exquisite. So this guy knows what to do. He is a tactician, and I will be right by his side doing everything possible to see that Mike Johnson is successful, to see that the House of Representatives is successful in our oversight goals, and ultimately that the American people are successful. The other thing, Trump and Mike Johnson get along so well. You'll remember back in one of the impeachments of yesteryear, Mike Johnson was actually on the Trump defense team, driving a lot of the message and a lot of the legal strategy that was ultimately successful in the Senate.
It starts at high noon. I hear Elise Stefanik's going to put his name in nomination. Matt, where do people go on social media to follow you? Because it's going to be an intense day. We're not quite there yet.
I'm going to be breaking down more detail on how this developed and even what we're doing now to ensure that we lock down those last votes on my podcast, Firebrand, that people can find on Rumble, on YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts. Also at Matt Gaetz, at Rep Matt Gaetz, anywhere on the internet. I do a pretty good job letting you know what's happening.
Congressman Gaetz, fantastic job. Great work overnight. Look forward to talking to you this afternoon.
This is what victory feels like, man. We got more to do, but I've told you in the past, and I've told the audience in the past, don't celebrate yet. You know what? You deserve this. You deserve this moment when this godly good man takes this position, and we can finally show you what a fighting Republican Party in control of the House of Representatives looks like. I have not seen that in 7 years under McCarthy and Paul Ryan. We finally get a chance with Mike Johnson. This is a great day.
Amen, brother.